Greetings, and welcome to today's webinar entitled, Making the Business Case for an EA and IT Planning Solution. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. A brief question-and-answer session will follow the formal presentation. Please submit your questions using the WebEx chat feature. Names and companies will remain anonymous. If anyone should require operator or technical assistance during the conference, please press *0 on your telephone keypad. As a reminder, this conference is being recorded. It is now my pleasure to introduce your moderator, Mr. Paul Kendall. Thank you, Mr. Kendall. You may now begin.
Thank you. Hello and welcome, everyone. I am Paul Kendall, a product manager at Alphabet, and I will be introducing today's topic, Making the Business Case for an EA and IT Planning Solution. We find that many EA programs are beginning to make headway in their organizations, understanding that today's EA mission is to ensure that IT is delivering to business needs. EA teams today better understand their role as the linchpin between many different corporate units and as the driver of IT strategy and its alignment with business goals. As EA teams become more effective at illustrating the value good EA management can bring to the corporation and the plans for doing so, IT is getting increased corporate support for EA programs and funding for staff. As EA programs embark on their first steps, such as application retirement and consolidation, or aligning IT projects with business strategy, they find that the tools they have for what they need are inadequate for building any kind of sustainable processes. As they explore the market for what they need, their next hurdle is in getting funding for an EA and IT planning solution. How to convince an organization to spend money in order to save money. It's in making a watertight business case for an IT planning solution where many EA organizations struggle. This is the topic of today's discussion. But first, I'd like to introduce our featured speakers, David O'Connell from Nucleus Research and Uli Kallex from Alphabet. David contributes to Nucleus' industry-leading body of research by performing interviews, writing research reports, and building ROI tools. Mr. O'Connell follows a number of sectors, including application development, integration, business intelligence, and workforce management. He also researches and identifies best practices that enable enterprises to reduce their IT costs. As a former commercial banker, David is particularly skilled in evaluating how solutions impact the roles of the CFO, the controller, and treasurer, and has been writing and presenting technology-oriented business cases for more than 10 years. Mr. O'Connell is the author of numerous ROI reports, evaluation reports, tools, and case studies, and has contributed to articles for various trade publications, as well as No Boundaries, a textbook on business intelligence applications. Uli Kallex leads Alphabet's product strategy and roadmap division. Prior to joining Alphabet in April 2005, he held several positions at i2 Technologies between 1998 and 2005, the most recent as product manager at Downstream Oil and Gas, developing solutions for supply chain management and the oil industry. Before serving as a consultant and developer for various companies such as Numetrix and Monsanto from 1994 to 1998, Dr. Kallex lectured in information technology and mathematics at the Bauhaus University in Weimar, Germany. And now, let's turn to our first question, which I'll pose to David. Why is it that IT has such a hard time creating a meaningful and convincing business case?
Well, first, I think that's a great question, and I'm glad we're talking about it today. But first, what I'd like to do is let the folks attending the webinar know a little bit about why Nucleus Research is on the call today. Nucleus Research, we are an analyst firm, and folks can think of us as being in sort of the same pie chart as, say, Forrester and Gartner. But whereas those folks do a great deal of forward-looking and opinion-based research, we do a great deal of journalistic, very objective, almost auditing type work. Folks like Alphabet contact us. They let us know that they've got some strong deployments out there. And what we do is we go out and we talk to users, and we frankly audit those deployments. And what we do is we ask a lot of really granular questions about the deployments, about the pain points, the benefits, the costs. And what we're always doing is we're always driving at calculating the ROI and the payback of those deployments. And generally, we do this in the format of a case study. I think we're up in the thousands of case studies that we have out there at this point. We also create ROI calculator tools. And there are a number of those available on the website for free. And I think we're at about 4.7 million in downloads of those tools at this point. An important thing for folks to know about Nucleus Research is that we are NASDA certified. NASBA is the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy. Sounds kind of bureaucratic, and it also sounds like a mouthful, but I'll explain why it's important. NASBA comes into Nucleus Research a couple of times every year, and what they do is they look at all the work that we do, and they confirm that we're doing it in accordance to GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles. The reason that that's important is that we help folks like you out in making the business case. Your audience in making the business case is always the CFO's office or maybe the investment committee. And these folks speak in GAAP. So it's really important for you to know that all the work we do is in GAAP, and that's how your audience thinks. So getting back to the question of EA, why is it hard? I think it's kind of an interesting question. First of all, it's something that kind of only IT understands the importance of. Very few people are in a position to understand that the enterprise architecture may have some issues out there, so only they kind of understand the importance of it. On the other hand, IT is good at IT. They may not necessarily be good at building the business case or doing things like calculating ROI and payback. That's sort of a finance thing. Another problem is that their audience kind of thinks that, kicking the can down the road and doing things the way they're currently done with bubblegum and string still works. Another issue is people have reluctance for political reasons. They may be reluctant to find out just how bad things are out there on the enterprise, or they may be reluctant to find out that a particular vendor that they've been backing for a number of years probably shouldn't be on the enterprise. So what is the response to IT when they do propose something? Well, their audience, the CFO's office or the investment committee, or maybe even the line of business, they think everything's coming up roses. They say, well, my email works, the systems never crash, and you folks in IT, you always want shiny new objects that are really expensive. Generally what's going on out there, the response that IT gets, is people say, why should I spend money to find out what I already know about our systems? When I was making this slide, I almost, that takeaway in italics at the bottom of the slide, I almost wrote it as, why should I spend money to find out what I think I already know about our systems? And the reason for that is that I think that lots of people tend to be pretty surprised. Organizations, frankly, have no idea what's out there on their enterprise. When I was on the phone talking with a number of companies that had deployed planning IT, that was the main thing I found out, that they were interested to find out what exactly was out there, and they did some pretty interesting things with that information. And doing interesting things with the information that you get from planning IT is kind of at the crux of all this. It really should be easy to make the case because everybody kind of wants the same things. Everybody likes simplicity, whether it's simplicity of workflows or simplicity of vendor relationships or simply making the number of applications and the way they're arranged on the enterprise architecture more simple. Everybody likes to make things simple. People like to save money once things are streamlined and rationalized, and everybody likes less busy work for roles like architects and developers, and also the people who make decisions about about evaluating potential IT investments. And the takeaway here is applications that tame the enterprise architecture save money. This is definitely in everybody's interest.
David, let me just jump in here for a few further comments and remarks. I think it's definitely the case that the business case should be easy because there are so many sources of inefficiency, and I'll be talking to some of these sources in just a minute. Yet it is clear that not everyone can readily identify these inefficiencies. And furthermore, obviously there is a significant number of people out there that wouldn't even know that there is technology and there are technology solutions out there that can help with addressing these types of inefficiencies and problems. So let's spend a few words on what the inefficiencies are and what they are originating from. The simple layman's understanding is that IT is all about having a current state, developing and deriving a target state from the business and IT strategy, and then doing some linear interpolation to coming to an understanding how to get from the current state to this target state. Now, unfortunately, the situation is quite different because of the volatility that exists in the world out there. Both volatility that is originating from market pressure, from competitive threats, from opportunities that are opening up in the market that typically are reflected as changes to strategy and as new demands. On the other hand, there are changes to technology, again, changes that are primarily obsolescence of technology, so vendors are calling off support for certain technologies. There are opportunities opening up in technology space as well, and truly companies want to embrace these opportunities on a increasingly rapid pace. So what we are seeing is really what is required isn't just this static interpolation between the current state and the target state. It is coping with that crooked line of encroaching from the current state to the target state, which means there's a need for a continuous planning and management process which has to be collaborative and integrated in nature. Now, looking at what companies are doing these days, it is very apparent that on the one hand, there is a relatively large and certainly very dispersed set of stakeholders in the organization, ranking from the leadership levels, both in the IT as well as in the business arena, through a multitude of functions. These all are individuals that are working by different targets, by different timelines, oftentimes in different locations and functions of the organization. They have little to no support through process and tools, and in particular, it is apparent that the information base they are using is broken in so many different forms and fashions, because what they're using is more often than not Microsoft Office tools such as PowerPoint or Word or even email. Now, over the years, there have been several attempts addressing this with point solutions. They have all turned out to not work too pretty. And what we are left with is really a set of inefficiencies. On the one hand, this information that is very dispersed across the organization, oftentimes not formally captured, but really in people's heads. There is a plethora of planning activities that are being conducted, very uncoordinated and unorchestrated. There is a lack of governance in that planning process, which results in a inability to do replanning and hence coping with these changes that are being imposed to the environment here. And the collaboration between the many different stakeholders is pretty inadequate. Now, what can and should one do addressing these four issues? On the information management side, it is really important to get away from this office, email, maybe access database here or there type of approach where you are not naming the Excel sheets by the owner that has developed the Excel sheets, which we find with many organizations. Going away from this and really coming to what we call the logical inventory of business IT management artifacts, financials, applications, the business strategies, the business processes, and so on and so forth. And making sure this information is being served up to the different stakeholders, and obviously these are the same stakeholders that we talked about earlier. On a second level, we are talking about supporting the business processes. And there is a variety of different business processes here. One more on the strategic level, the other one more on operational level, and the third one more on like monitoring and governance functions. it is important that the organization has a clarity about these processes, that there is a common understanding of what these processes are and how they are interacting and which stakeholders are participating in which of these processes. Now, this is it's somehow funny. There should be pictures here showing the stakeholders. So the stakeholders are interacting with a set of processes, overcoming the lack of business buy-in and sponsorship, because business is roped into these processes from the beginning. The lack of business intelligence and governance, because it is all being sponsored from a common information platform, and it is all being tied into a common set of business processes, IT business processes, that is. And there's a reduction in the planning errors that previously have been caused by not considering all the different perspectives of these different stakeholders, and that now, as we are bringing in all these stakeholders into a common set of processes, that is overcome. And that is enabled, and now you can see actually the pretty pictures, that is enabled by a role-based access. So every of the roles, every of the stakeholder roles contributing will have its own access. It is enabled by workflow enablement in the platform. It is being supported through a central information repository, providing the different business-related views, providing collaboration aiding tools such as discussion groups or automated alerts or early warnings. And it is being further supported by having a strong focus on data quality with a variety of data quality enablers.
Yuli, I really kind of like that slide. All those roles there. In fact, the diagram is actually a picture of an investment committee. And by that I mean an investment committee at an investment shop on Wall Street or a bank or a big insurance company. And let's say, for example, it's a bank. All those people in those pictures, there would be a loan underwriter, a loan officer, maybe a collateral analyst, and then various people of differing seniorities on the loan committee who might approve a loan or approve an investment, okay? The reason I bring this point up is that investment shops, insurance companies, and banks are built this way. They have processes, and and workflows and applications that support that. But companies actually don't have a very pretty, well-supported arrangement when it comes to the process of analyzing potential IT investments and monitoring the enterprise architecture, okay? What I found by talking to folks who use planning IT is that lots of interesting things happen when you do have an application at the center of that daisy of roles who all need to participate in monitoring the enterprise architecture and really considering very carefully and selectively what investments to make. Because we're talking about planning IT and the way it changes how people view the enterprise architecture and how they make decisions about it, I think it makes a lot of sense to talk a little bit about the benefits. One of the first benefits that I heard from folks when I was talking to them about their planning IT deployment was that they did fewer development projects, meaning building internal applications, and they did fewer deployment projects in general, okay? This is actually the most readily validated benefit that I came across from talking to folks. It turns out that redundant capabilities do abound out there on the enterprise. When companies deploy planning IT and put all the information about their enterprise architecture, they find those redundant capabilities. And the important thing is that when a new business requirement or request comes in from the line of business, planning IT users are far more able to find an existing asset to fulfill that business need rather than create a new one. The takeaway here being planning IT users commonly find ways to fulfill new business requirements with existing assets, and that saves companies a significant amount of money, I found. And Yuli, I think that we're kind of touching on the issue of visualization, and I think you have a way to help folks out with that.
Absolutely. The visualization really is important here, and one way of, for instance, understanding the redundancy that you were just mentioning is shown in that visualization here, where you see processes running across the top, and you can see organizations running along the vertical, and then in the cells you have the different IT assets in blue that are providing support to the process in the specific organization, which is one of the reasons for redundancies to be abound, that because of mergers and acquisitions, because of separation in decision authority in the past, companies have amassed these IT solutions, these IT assets that are supporting the same or very similar business processes in different pockets of the organization. And I also find it interesting, the quote that is here at the bottom of the slide that further substantiates the statement that you had made earlier about companies becoming aware of what solutions do we have already available and how can we reuse these solutions, how can we leverage these solutions to meeting other demands originating from the business.
So there are two things that folks do with the visibility that Yuli's talking about. Again, the first thing they do is they avoid internal development projects and they do fewer deployments in general. But another really important thing is that people discover just how many instances they have of different applications out there. It's very common for a planning IT user to discover that they're buying CRM from 7 different vendors. And this is not a good thing. It's too expensive. And, there's an old adage out there, with change comes opportunity. And when I was interviewing folks about planning IT, it occurred to me that with visibility comes rationalization. And in fact, the scale of redundancy out there on enterprise architectures did surprise people, and they were doing a lot of rationalizations. One company in the finance world that I spoke to said that they were really kind of shocked to discover, in fact, that they had 30 trade booking applications, and they're going to reduce the number of those. They're going to reduce the number of trade booking applications that they have down to at most 15. This is a really big deal because it saves money in a few different ways. Naturally, it consolidates the buying power, and you deal with, say, 3 or 4 vendors instead of 9 or 10, and you get better pricing from fewer vendors. If you control the purchasing a little more tightly, you can purchase less unneeded functionality, which means each seat costs a little bit less money. And when you have fewer applications, you have your other deployment costs are also lower. It's less expensive to train people on 2 or 3 applications rather than 10 or 11. And and consulting. Anytime you have 30 applications, you're doing a great deal of little pieces of code development to create all the integration that you need. If you take that down, again, you're going to have fewer consultants running around doing things and sending you bills. But one of the most important things is agility. And I have to admit, this is a little bit hard to quantify financially. But if you are, say, a brokerage house and you've got 30 trade booking systems, and suddenly you've got a change in the competitive landscape, or maybe a change in the regulatory landscape, you may need to do something. You may need to do some change to the way traders do things or the way trades are booked. And it's going to be a bear and really expensive and very time-consuming to do it to 30 applications instead of 4 or 5 or 15.
David, let me chime in here just with an additional note. And I think it's very interesting you're saying, okay, resolving this redundancy. But then people may say, okay, how do I understand which of the 30 trading applications to retain and which to potentially sundown or replace? And I want to come back to this example you made earlier on the investment management similarity. this is one of these places where we see similarities, like investment managers that are assessing their portfolio in the famous portfolio matrices. Like they are looking at key performance characteristics in these 2 or 3 dimensional portfolios. The architects, the experts in the IT planning space do the same. They are looking at performance of, for instance, applications in this case, or at technology options that they have, or at solution options. Identify the ones that have the highest cost to value potential, for instance, or identify the ones that have the lowest cost to value potential, and take the ones that have the lowest cost to value potential as the candidates for replacement or sundowning. And again, an example from an insurance customer of ours who's been able to, using this technology, who's been able to identify about $11 million US in savings by simply avoiding internal development projects.
Thanks, Yuli. So we've been talking about some of the really great benefits that I was able to validate that folks get when they deploy planning IT. In addition to these big sort of vision-based benefits, there are also sort of old-fashioned productivity benefits. What I found when I spoke to folks was actually kind of interesting. It turns out that many IT departments actually have kind of a service role. You have a lot of folks in the IT department who tend to be picking up the phone or answering emails in which they have a question about some component on the enterprise architecture. It's an inbound request from, say, the board or Wall Street or a line of business or the CEO's office or the CFO's office. And life is pretty difficult for these folks because the information is spread all over the place. Different people have it in different types of Excel, Word, PowerPoint, access databases. When I asked folks how they did things before planning IT, I heard about just about every application out there. So when a company shifts from that sort of mishmash of poorly governed documents scattered across the enterprise, it rescued IT folks from what I call Excel hell, and they were able to do things a lot more quickly. Another thing is folks who use planning IT kept telling me, they'd say, David, a really great thing about planning IT is that it attaches so much data to each document that you can sift and sort and kind of drill down and drill across by a really large variety of parameters. You can do a query based on cost, based on the supported business process or the owner. And so with all that data and all that variability of querying and report building, they were able to become more productive. They fulfilled queries a lot faster. They built reports a lot faster. And then a really important thing about planning IT is it actually changes who does what. It moves the responsibility of application documentation out to the application owners, be it someone in IT or maybe a line of business owner. They're the ones who own the application. They also own the responsibility of keeping it properly documented in planning IT. And so as a result of that, in addition to folks in IT becoming more productive when they do this kind of thing, they actually have less of this kind of work to do. And I think, Yuli, you've got a slide that you can use to speak to how it kind of changes day-to-day life.
Yes, it's really about information at your fingertips. And now, obviously, I could bring many, many different examples here. This is just one showing for a technology owner here. Providing different perspectives into one consolidated view of the piece of world that I'm currently interested in. And traditionally, people have done this with Microsoft Office solutions. We have seen customers that have PowerPoint slide decks with slides that go into the hundreds, trying to resemble the same amount and the same type of information. And obviously, creating and updating these massive amounts of office-based pockets of information is very, very labor-intensive, and one of our customers in the financial services industry was actually saying, okay, if I had to do this with Office, it would take me 8 to 10 additional people, which obviously my CIO is not willing to make an investment to.
So we're talking about lots of benefits here, and I've been mentioning kind of ROI and payback, and we're thinking about making the business case. So when it comes to making the business case, I want to give you a few tips about what benefits to look for and then how to calculate them, okay? So first of all, the benefits. Break the benefits down into, first of all, the impact on roles, and then also the impact on decision-making. So here on this slide, let's think about the impact on roles. Think about how life is going to be different in 3 roles, basically: architects, developers, and administrators. Architects and developers, whenever they start a project, they have to do a lot of research. Architects have to find out about all the applications and interdependencies and get a lot of information so they can delegate to developers who should do what. Developers do a lot of similar research, but on a smaller level. What I found was that because all the information is centralized and uniform in planning IT, architects and developers are able to do that kind of research faster. Another benefit for developers that I think you want to think ahead about is faster development, because when you know more about the enterprise architecture, you can find little chunks of reusable assets out there. Not quite, Nirvana SOA, but people do find things out there that they can use. And again, administrators, they're doing a number of things faster: report building, inquiries, and administration of documentation. So let's kind of quickly think about the math. It's actually pretty easy. There aren't that many data points that you need. You need the number of folks that you think are going to benefit, multiply it by their fully loaded cost, and then multiply it by the % improvement that you think you're going to get. So maybe it's 10 architects. They each cost $130,000 a year, and they're going to become 14% more productive. It's just simply the product of those 3 factors is going to get you to your data point. So now let's think a little bit about what happens to decision making. It is absolutely true that once IT planning gets deployed and data is properly in there, that people make decisions in a much different way. They avoid projects. They sunset applications. They consolidate applications. They get rid of vendors. Okay, there are ways to quantify these benefits. First of all, avoided projects is pretty easy. You can think about the developer years and multiply it by the fully loaded cost. Every application, every project that you avoid, every new solution that you don't adopt or retire is going to reduce support costs because you have folks internally helping you run those applications. For each application, maybe it's a fraction of a full-time equivalent in your IT department, and that's okay because you're going to free up a portion of that person's time. Basically take the portion of that person's time, the percentage, and multiply it by their fully loaded cost. Other things to think about are lower annual license maintenance costs. Think about how many seats of a particular application you're going to retire and therefore no longer spend money on. Now, I'm talking, those 2 slides had a lot of data points out there, and people in the audience may be looking at those slides and saying, my God, where on earth, how on earth would I possibly get that information? Well, I actually get this information on a daily basis. I'm always interviewing people and writing case studies. And maybe some of you remember that X-Files, the show The X-Files. The slogan there was, the truth is out there. Well, the information really is out there for you to build this business case. And the reason for that is that there are people living very intimately with all these pain points. When people live with a pain point, they know how much it costs, and they know how much money can be saved if you make it go away. Okay? So do feel confident in going out and finding people and interviewing them, I think with some granularity about what's going on out there. A little more information about making the business case, and this is about credibility. Take a lot of notes and make sure you have a lot of backup information about the research that you do and the values of the estimated benefits that you have. Let folks know how you calculated it, why you calculated it, who helped you, what line of business manager helped you come up with a particular data point. A few tips about how to boost the credibility of your numbers. When it comes to productivity, lots of times people don't believe the value of that productivity benefit. And the reason for that is that not all time saved because of a change like this is going to be converted into time spent on new work. Let's face it, people spend time updating their Facebook pages and things like that. So do apply a correction factor. So that calculation we were looking at a few minutes ago, 10 developers times their fully loaded cost times the percent productivity improvement, and then reduce it by maybe 25 or 50%, depending on how driven or not driven you think that particular type of worker is, to convert that time saved into time spent on new work. I also think that you should present a down case. A down case is different from what I just talked about. Sometimes deployments don't deploy as broadly as you want. Sometimes things go wrong in terms of higher consulting costs. So in addition to being careful with your productivity benefits, present the down case. Maybe take the benefits down by a third to assume perhaps that you'll have to delay getting an application deployed across the entire enterprise. I'm telling you, to not get downcased. And by that, what I mean is don't present just a base business case, because what could happen is that you'll present it to your boss. They'll downcase it by, say, 30 or 50%. They'll present it to someone else. They'll downcase it again. And you could possibly have a 50% productivity benefit or a 40% overall benefit dialed down to a 10% benefit. On the other hand, don't be too intimidated by your audience. The benefits are out there, and they do happen, okay? When you figure out what you think a benefit really will be, don't be intimidated by the finance folks or your audience and arbitrarily reduce the number. That's not going to help your case. A few things about metrics with regard to making the business case. Lead with ROI and payback. And I'm not going to go into ROI and payback right now because we don't have the time, but I will point you to some assets at the Nucleus Research website that you can use. Lead with ROI and payback. ROI is the rate of return. Payback is an indication of how fast you get that money back. People can touch payback. Some of us, we refinance our mortgages every now and then. And what we do is we compare the savings to the transaction costs. And if lowering our mortgage can pay for the transaction costs in 2 or 3 months, well, we'll probably do it. So I bring up that analogy just to remind you that payback is a really tangible metric that people can get their hands around. It's a measure of risk. It's a measure of time. And frankly, I think it makes people's heart rates go down. If you're presenting a business case with a high ROI and you're able to convey to your audience that it will pay for itself in 8 months, then you're going to be doing well with that audience, okay? Other finance metrics. You folks, you'll probably be presenting to the CFO's office or investment committee members who have finance backgrounds. They may come back to you and say, gee, you should have used return on assets, or you should have used internal rate of return. It turns out that ROI and payback are the only metrics that really work for software. The reason for that is all the other financial metrics out there, they're designed for assets that have residual values. And by that I mean they're designed for a bond that you sell for par at the end, or they're designed for a printing press that can be sold to a liquidator at the end of its useful life. At the end of a software deployment's useful life, it has zero value, okay? And because of that, you should not be using the standard financial asset metrics other than ROI and payback, okay? So I'm giving you that information because I want you to be able to defend your choice of these metrics with the folks from finance. Don't be intimidated by them. It's not rocket science, and I want you to feel comfortable about why you're going with ROI and payback. Very briefly, I'm going to try to move a little bit more quickly because I'm looking at the clock and we're at 11:44. 5 factors of an ROI, People are always asking Nucleus, what are the factors that can make a deployment have a high ROI? Their breadth breadth, repeatability, cost, collaboration, and knowledge. A deployment will have a high ROI if it has breadth, meaning it benefits many different people. It will also have a high ROI if the people who use it touch and benefit from the application many times a day. Planning IT is actually kind of interesting because could we back up a slide? Planning IT is actually kind of interesting because it benefits from these other benefits that tend to be somewhat less powerful, but they hit on these metrics in a very big way, okay? An application is going to generate a high ROI if it changes how people work with regard to a costly task or a costly investment. It also will have a high ROI if it enables people to collaborate or exchange knowledge in a different way, okay? Planning IT lives right across all three of these benefits, okay? It helps people exchange knowledge about something extremely important and costly, the enterprise architecture. And by exchanging, I mean it helps them collaborate. And it also helps them collaborate and exchange knowledge about how they're going to manage those, frankly, huge costs that people don't know are out there on the enterprise. So if we could now move on to that slide. Thank you very much. I want folks to be a little bit careful about some of the information that can be out there. Sometimes people talk about average ROIs. I tend to think that an average ROI is not a good idea. The reason for that is because every deployment that goes into an average has a different beginning and end state, okay? So this is kind of a hokey, this is a bit of a hokey analogy here, but if someone does a deployment where they go from stone tablets to, quill and ink pens, they're going to get a high ROI on that. But you have to wonder it's not all that brilliant that they used stone tablets for so long. Again, kind of a hokey slide, but beware of average ROIs because every deployment has a different beginning state. So, as a summary here, remember ROI is the basis on which IT and line of business should evaluate projects, and ROI is the basis. ROI and payback, I should say, is the basis on which folks should be able to collaborate and talk about the fact that an organization really may need enterprise architecture management enabled by planning IT. Find the visibility benefits from better managing enterprise architecture with something like planning IT. If you get that visibility, you're going to notice things that are really important. Too many applications, fulfilling new business requests by building new applications instead of turning to existing assets. When you make the business case, be realistic with your benefit calculations. Be thorough. Have lots of backup when you present to your audience. Have a down case. And again, remember, payback is very important. It's an extremely tangible, almost emotional metric that your audience will very readily be able to understand. And if we could move on, great, we're at the next slide. I want to point folks out to some really important assets out there. I invite you to go to the Nucleus Research website. I'm super embarrassed that there's a space in that website name. I was writing the slide and thinking of the Nucleus Research name. Obviously no space in the website title there. So go to nucleusresearch.com. You'll get a feel for why and how Nucleus has become, the subject matter experts in ROI with regard to virtually every type of application out there, and we've analyzed deployments in virtually every vertical. A way to get acclimated and maybe go through ROI 101 is to go to the Nucleus website, click Research, and then there's a button called Do ROI Right. And there's sort of a knowledge base there that you can use to get up to speed. There's lots of really good basic topics. I'm zooming through a lot of ROI content here, but you can go to that asset there at the Nucleus Research website and kind of take your time with it. And then with regard to the piece that Nucleus has published for Alphabet, at the Nucleus Research website, there's a pretty easy research window there. And if you just put the term Alphabet in there, you'll be able to get to the piece. And I think that's about it. I think I want to hand it back to Paul at this point, so we can maybe go to some Q&A if we have any.
Wonderful. Thank you, David and Uli, for walking us through today's increasingly relevant topic. We have about 10 minutes left in our regularly scheduled time, so at this point, I would like to turn over to Lena, who's going to walk us through some of the questions that have been coming in during the session.
Thank you, Paul. We're having a lot of interesting questions coming in from the chat. Let's turn to the first question, which I will pose to David. David, how detailed does the business case have to be in presenting to a CFO, an IT finance manager, or line of business leader?
That's a great question. In fact, lots of times the analysts here at Nucleus are on the phone coaching folks who are about to go before their board or their CFO. It's a little bit hard to answer, okay? But what I think that you want to do is you want to present enough information that your presentation is simple and straightforward, okay? And by that I mean they can understand all of the logic and all of the benefits that you're talking about, okay? Don't overwhelm them with detail. Maximize your credibility by giving them some information. Don't provide lots of footnotes, but basically describe the process that you went through. When they know that you that you did 3 or 4 interviews with 3 or 4 IT managers in different subsidiaries, and they have a feel for the questions that you asked, you want to let them know not every question that you asked, but the process that you went through. One very important thing that I always tell folks to do with their business case or their ROI and payback presentation is this. Every deployment is going to have 8 or 9 benefits, okay? But it's also true that every deployment, it's also true that for every deployment, the vast majority of the value of the benefits come from only 2 or 3 of those benefits, okay? So once you've analyzed all your benefits, okay, find the 2 or 3 biggest benefits in terms of impact on the income statement and present only those 3 in your business case, okay? At some point in your overall presentation, mention the fact that you're going to get those other benefits, but I really think that it helps to keep things really credible, and it helps to keep things fairly straightforward and readily understood for your audience if you boil it down to 3 or 4 big benefits. The more you throw up on PowerPoint slides, the more that you put on those PowerPoint slides, the more that you might overwhelm them, and they might feel like you're sort of padding or packing the numbers with too many benefits.
Thank you, David. The second question we received is directed at Uli. To what extent does the IT planning solution need to be deployed to start being able to demonstrate financial benefits?
Very good question, and actually one that we are seeing a lot and hearing a lot from customers and prospects. Planning IT, by its very nature, is a type of an ERP solution. So it is one of these solutions that have a significant breadth and depth coming with it. Yet, for an initial deployment, there is no need to really going into each and every of the aspects that the solution provides. What is really important is identifying a pain area in your organization that is of matter to the peers, specifically to the skeptical peers in the business units. So identify a problem situation such as a redundancy in the business support. Identify a problem situation such as constant scope creep in projects, or such as conflicts in the project execution between different projects in your portfolio. Identify a situation such as a technology portfolio rationalization needs that you have, or a business transformation that business is busy with preparing, and that you in IT can provide significant help and input and push to actually making successful. Once you have identified this one pain point that you feel strongest about with your organization, we will help you finding the information needs and the processes that are really required here to making sure this pain point is addressed in an initial implementation. And then that initial implementation typically takes anywhere between 6 and 8, 10, maybe 12 weeks, and almost for certain that in the first 6 months you will be seeing the benefits coming in, and you will be able to demonstrate and showcase to the organization that it was a valuable undertaking investing into this planning IT implementation.
Great.
Actually, I wanted to kind of chime in. I really liked the way Uli answered that question, because planning IT is ideally deployed kind of as a hub and spoke deployment, because that's when it generates the hugest benefit. Because when everybody's on planning IT, that's when the maximum visibility is there for consolidating applications and reusing assets. Okay, but it's also true that the companies can deploy planning IT in a hub and then spoke way. And by that I mean I saw a lot of deployments in which planning IT was first deployed where there was a pain point, or maybe in the central IT department. And what happened was people readily saw the value and the benefit from it, and then it was fairly easy to make the business case. Gee, we should get everyone else on here so that we can achieve that success again, and in different ways and in different business operations.
Let's turn to Uli again. One of our guests agrees that all these benefits seem really terrific, but assumes that they probably don't happen automatically. So, Uli, what is the most important thing people should do if they're going to deploy planning IT?
I think the single most important thing they have to do is really identifying that pain point, and I don't want to repeat what I already said. Other than this, it's really now working back from that pain point, understanding, okay, what processes and what stakeholder contribution can provide resolution to this pain point. What information needs do these stakeholders have in the process that they are trying to establish here, and who has information today in the organization? Where is such information available in, as we already mentioned, the various PowerPoint presentations, Visio diagrams, Excel spreadsheets, Access databases, SharePoint repositories, whatever it may be. So where is that information today, and how can we possibly get that information out of their original source where it lies today, so that we can institutionalize that information, that we can provide stewardship models to this information, meaning responsibility, that we can provide data management processes around this information, that we can set up automated alerting and notification mechanisms so that consumers of that information know as and when that information changes, and responsible for that information are going to be notified as and when that information needs updating.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, so this will be our last question now. David, what kinds of ROI and paybacks are you seeing on deployments? I'm
actually seeing some somewhat attractive ROIs and paybacks. I was almost going to comment on Uli's answer a second ago. I understand people's skepticism, but actually I'm in the middle of I'm drafting a case study right now where a fairly large organization fully deployed planning IT in 10 weeks. And by that I mean they deployed it at the hub, and they had all the asset owners fully documenting into planning IT. They also had some really good, fast consultant work who helped import all the information, from all those ugly old existing assets in Excel databases and Excel spreadsheets and things like that. So I am seeing fairly high paybacks, and a payback, fairly high ROIs, and paybacks of less than a year. I'm possibly doing 2 case studies. I'm kind of pre-screening them right now, one deployment looks like it paid for itself in 3 months, and another deployment looks like it paid for itself in something like 7 or 8 months. And here's what I want people to think about: is if you deploy planning IT enterprise-wide, yes, it's going to take a lot of a certain amount of work to get everybody on board and contributing their assets and information into it. Okay, but the thing is when you get a hit, when you get a win from planning IT, it's a huge win. Okay, the wins such as we didn't invest $1 million in developing this application. We didn't invest 4 developer years in that application. We fired 3 or 4 vendors, and now we've pushed the price of the remaining vendors down by 20%. Okay, the wins are there, and they are kind of big. And I think that people, I appreciate skepticism and caution, but I also think that people shouldn't be pessimistic that the wins are out there. And as a person who really knows ROI, as an SME, as a subject matter expert on it, I think the wins are big enough that properly deployed, you can pay for the deployment fairly fast.
Thank you, David. I'm now handing over to Paul again.
Thank you, Lena. This brings us to the close of today's session, but first I want to thank both David and Uli for walking us through today's dialogue and for everyone for coming out. For those of you who have unanswered questions, I strongly encourage you to reach out to both David and Uli directly using the email addresses that you see on this last slide. There will be a replay of today's webinar up on the Alphabet website in the next few days, and that is the close of today's session. So again, thank you everyone for coming out.
Ladies and gentlemen, this does conclude today's conference. You may disconnect your lines at this time, and we thank you all for your participation. Have a wonderful day.